Come with me to check out a brutal story. It all kicks off with our main character on the ground, looking absolutely tiny next to this massive shadow looming over him. A menacing silhouette with its fist raised, ready to absolutely smash him to pieces. Right from when he was a little kid, violence was just his daily bread and butter. His old man, who didn't know any other way to raise him, used to bash him mercilessly, but every hit, every wave of pain, seemed to give him this weird burst of energy. Cruelty just became a built-in part of his life. Copping or hiding was so normal that he literally couldn't imagine living any other way. Right now, inmate 7199 is shaking while two massive blokes pin him down. A third bloke was loading up a slingshot with a coin, completely ignoring him begging for mercy. Our boy, gulping hard, suggested to his attacker that he should just use his fists instead of going to all that effort just to hurt him. The giant with the slingshot paused for a second, trying to wrap his head around such a weird request. Kemino, a blonde bloke doing a 2-year stint for assault, looked at his victim with absolute disgust. With a mocking smirk, he reminded him that he was the one who'd take on any humiliating job just for a bit of cash. Suddenly, an image flashed through his mind. The prisoner shivering in that cheap uniform, shoveling snow for just 3,000 measly won. Sanjo also remembered with utter disgust how the kid had hugged dozens of shoes just to warm them up, and all for a pitiful 1,001. The bully kept listing off heaps more of his humiliations, remembering how, for 2001, he forced him to act like a dog all bloody day, demanding he bark more realistically. But get a load of this. They offered him a new deal, 5,001 just to act as a human target with a circle painted on his face. The tight band of the slingshot pulled back right near the marked kid's face, who was already mentally bracing himself for the incoming pain. This juvenile correctional facility for under 19s held all the most troubled teens in the country. Its walls locked up the most violent young crims in Korea. San told his prey to shut his eyes so the coin wouldn't absolutely wreck his pupils. In that crime-filled hellhole, the band in the torturer's hand suddenly snapped. The coin went flying, and a confused Sanjo could only stutter as he stared at his useless torture weapon completely busted in his hands. The metal disc bounced all over the room like it had a mind of its own, from the door to the wall, right until it dropped straight into the toilet. The impact hitting that filthy water was so hard it set off a bloody, disgusting splash. The blonde leader asked his goons for a spare band, whinging about how hard it was to get a hold of that stuff in lockup. A massive grin lit up Yuban's face when they called him a lucky bastard. The young bloke was genuinely relieved by such an accidental save. When he was ordered to pick up the coin, the kid hurried over, practically overflowing with gratitude toward his tormentor, but Sanjo flashed this sinister grin, making it bloody obvious that it wouldn't end with just picking up the cash. The new order chilled Yuban right to the bone. He had to fish the coin out of the bottom of that foul toilet using only his mouth. The goons cracked up laughing, remembering how just yesterday some inmate had major stomach issues in there. Absolutely desperate for the cash, Yuban didn't even hesitate to dunk his head straight into that putrid water. Are you guys as shocked as I am? Everyone in there couldn't believe how low he'd stoop just for a few coins. Some of them looked away and pinched their noses, telling him to get the hell away from them. With the red paint dripping down his face, Yuban triumphantly showed off the coin clamped tight between his teeth. All he could think about was that 5,001. To the others, it was complete rubbish. But to him, it meant absolutely everything. An almost manic smile crept onto his face as he tallied up his total savings, 50,001. Later on, while walking down the hall, the thugs were saying how in just a month, Yuban had turned into someone who'd do literally anything for money. The chat turned to the reason he got locked up, attempted murder, which he copped a 3-year sentence for. The leader downplayed the crime compared to his greed, wondering why the hell the prisoner was so obsessed with scrounging up cash His thoughts were cut short by a guard, announcing visitors for inmate 7199. A really elegant girl rocked up to see Yuban, her flawless look clashing so hard against his wrecked, beaten face. It was Day, his friend, and the whole reason behind his obsession. She anxiously asked about his injuries. And trust me, you and I are only just seeing the beginning of this. Stick with me on this one. Mate, she switched to a dead serious tone, reminding him not to let anyone walk all over him from the very first day. Yuan tried to talk her out of visiting so much so she wouldn't blow her cash, but Daha, deeply hurt, exploded in pure rage. She yanked out a jar packed with coins, demanding to know where the funds sent to the orphanage really came from. She flat out rejected that dodgy money, leaving Yubuan absolutely gobsmacked. When she brought up an old promise, time seemed to freeze completely. Daha reminded him of their plans to move in together after graduation, demanding that he just focus on looking after his health. When the guard called time, she begged him to do absolutely whatever it takes to get out soon. Yuan gave her a wave goodbye. That fake smile vanished the second the door clicked shut. All alone in his cell, the agonizing memories came flooding back. He pictured himself in the hospital, cursing his old man for all the bloody grief. Right beside him was Daha, covered in nasty bruises and cruel scratches. She was the one who broke the gut-wrenching news. Yuban's dad had slipped into a coma after the bashing, and the cops weren't about to just let him off the hook. Yuban naively reckoned that his years of copping domestic abuse would serve as a solid excuse, but the reality of the justice system was absolutely ruthless and cruel. A hard-nosed judge handed down the sentence, 3 years in prison. You and I can feel this absolute helplessness. Mate, he couldn't wrap his head around such a massive injustice, seeing as he only tried to defend himself after literal years of brutal abuse. Snapping back to the present, Yuban stared at a photo from happier times. Smiling sweetly next to his beloved Daha, Sanjo clocked the photo, marched right over without a care, and started dropping filthy comments about how hot the girl was. Terrified, the prisoner clutched the photo tight to his chest, desperately trying to protect his most prized possession. The top dog just sneered, figuring it was nothing but unrequited love. And with a bossy tone, sounding like a dead-set death sentence, he ordered him to hand over the picture right that second. Yuborn's shaky voice gave away just how rattled he was as he flat-out refused to cave to the leader's demand. A sick, twisted smirk crept across Sanjo's face, his massive hand raised up for a strike, ready to teach Yuguan a brutal lesson. But right in that split second, the guard rocked up and put a stop to the imminent bashing. He was there to announce a fresh inmate for cell 36. Shock was written all over the blonde bloke's face, having no bloody clue about this sudden new addition. Prisoner 3000. 397 strolled in, looking completely defiant, with a shaved head and his eyes fixed on the floor. The guard warned them they'd be under temporary watch, demanding they steer clear of any inside brawls. Suddenly, Sanjo's pale face lit up with recognition. The inmates were whispering and pointing at the new bloke. And I know what you're thinking, he's infamous for wiping out a bunch of school bullies. Jim, covered in cuts and band-aids, just oozed pure aggression with every deadly glare. The spooked cellmates instinctively backed off into the furthest corners. Yuborn, on the other hand, he shuddered, realizing the bloke who had murdered 7 people was standing right in front of him. Sanjo's booming voice shattered the tense silence, mocking his cowardly mates. The leader sarcastically brushed off the killer, desperately trying to flex some fake superiority in here. He got up in Guom's face, sneering that he looked way too scrawny to be a murderer. Throwing his weight around, he demanded absolute obedience to the cell rules. The new arrival stayed completely silent, straight up ignoring the bait. His only answer was to turn his back on him in a dead-set provocative move. That just made Sanjo laugh, though it was really only to mask his massive, growing frustration. Unable to handle the disrespect, the top dog threw a punch, hurling a load of insults at Guam. The bloke convicted of 7 murders spun around at lightning speed. There was no way he was going to cop that humiliation without striking back. The frozen onlookers braced for the imminent hit. A totally tense Sanjo cursed his opponent's agility as he dodged the attack with spot-on precision. While dodging, John was already winding up an absolutely devastating payback strike. Watching the showdown unfold, Yuban felt a totally unexplainable sense of dread. That bloke who offed 7 people was clearly cut from a completely different cloth than your everyday prisoners. The gap between a common crook and a true blue criminal was an abyss that Yuban was only just starting to wrap his head around. Absolutely fuming and completely out of control, Sanjo unleashed a crushing blow on the newbie to teach him a harsh lesson in discipline. Blood splattered from Gion's nose from the heavy hit, but there wasn't an ounce of suffering on his face. And trust me, mate, you and I are barely even scratching the surface here. Yuban, absolutely paralyzed by the tension. Stick with me here. He couldn't tear his eyes away, trying to figure out what this dead silent new bloke was really up to. Sanjo's triumphant roar echoed right through the cell. He wanted to remind the boys of his absolute dominance and demand total obedience, no matter what the other bloke's rap sheet looked like. Pure confusion gripped the whole bloody lot of them. They fully expected this legendary assassin to fight back against the humiliating bashing. But guess what? The battered newbie just kept getting back up after every single bloody hit, copping the absolute beating without a single whinge. It was like he was testing his own patience, or even worse, plotting something seriously dark and twisted. Amidst the laughter and filthy looks from the rest of the inmates, Yuban couldn't stop thinking about the weird submission of a bloke known as a ruthless killer. After the chaos died down, prison life went back to its usual boring grind. While the bashed-up prisoner dragged himself to the furthest corner of the cell, wrapped up in a thick, impenetrable silence, Sanjo, absolutely desperate to flex his authority, gave the new bloke another smack while barking at him to grab some water. Dead silence and zero obedience. That was Guam's only response to the attempts to completely break him. Yuban was absolutely baffled, wondering where and how the hell this new bloke had picked up such a weird attitude inside the prison system. Now pay close attention here. While scrubbing the dunnies, the young bloke was thinking about the absolute hell this guy was going to unleash. The dead of night washed over the cell. Every prisoner hit the sack, drifting into a rough sleep weighed down by an absolutely brutal day. Guam, the new bloke, was sleeping right next to Yuban, sparking a strange sort of connection between 2 totally different men, lying there in the pitch black. Insomnia was eating them both alive. Yuban stared at the bloke's battered face and finally broke the silence. He wanted to give him the raw, bloody truth about surviving in the clink. The top dog's word is law. He's basically the absolute king inside these 4 walls. He gave him some fair dinkum advice. Fighting back would only make the hell 1,000 times worse. It was way better to just keep his head down and toe the line starting tomorrow. For the very first time, Gom looked him dead in the eye. He asked him if he'd already gotten used to living like an absolute dog. Yuban's face was completely shell-shocked. He just couldn't process the heavy weight of that question. Without waiting for a bloody answer, the new bloke just rolled over to face the wall. Yuban was left sitting there absolutely stunned after trying to do him a solid. That confronting question made our protagonist rethink the entire bloody meaning of his own existence. We've all been there. Right, he made up his mind to tough out the hell until he got out and reunited with his beloved D. But while the prisoner was dreaming of his peaceful freedom, his childhood friend was standing out in the freezing cold at a snowy crossing. The biting cold turned Dale's cheeks a bright pink, making her shiver absolutely uncontrollably. Horrible thoughts of a starved and skinny Yuban kept tormenting the beautiful girl's mind. The bag clutched in her freezing hands was packed with a solid feed and pure love. She needed him to be eating well. Even locked up in that hellhole, Dee knew bloody well that the stubborn Yuban would never admit just how horrible the slammer really was, and a sweet smile lit up her face just thinking about how much a proper, hearty feed would help him get his strength back. All of a sudden, the dead silence of winter was absolutely shattered by the brutal roar of a truck. The rig was speeding straight for her. The high beams completely blinded Dale, turning that simple zebra crossing into a bloody scene of absolute terror. The massive machine barreled into her fragile little body like a merciless metal monster. In that fatal, heartbreaking instant, Yuban was sleeping peacefully in his cell, totally clueless to the horrific tragedy that had just gone down. The massive truck smashed into the girl. Her lifeless body was left just lying there on the freezing cold snow. Later on, the morning brought a copper to the prison. His grim look and shattered words delivered the absolute worst news possible. The horrible truth of the fatal crash was slowly revealed in the officer's voice, as he painfully picked each word, trying to soften the absolute gut punch of the news. A tragic, gut-wrenching dread washed over the prisoner's face. Deep down, he was already bracing himself for the worst. Back in the cell, completely and utterly shattered, Yuban barely even registered the top dog screaming at him for not finishing the bloody dunnies. A seriously pissed off Sanjo marched right up to the paralyzed bloke, screaming at him to explain his total lack of respect. The blonde bloke spotted the photo clutched in Yuban's hands and actually started mocking his incredible raw pain. The other cellmates, showing a totally unexpected flash of empathy, explained the tragic news. And trust me, you and I both know this is going to change absolutely everything. The ruthless Sanjo, completely ignoring his grief, tore into him for lying about his relationship with the late girl. Stick with me here, because nicking that photo and mocking his dead girlfriend was the absolute worst mistake he could have made. Keeping up the taunts, he shoved the photo right in his face, making a complete mockery of his massive loss right in front of all the other inmates. The ringleader started a bloody auction, asking for 500 buwons just for the picture of the deceased girl. Yuban was still absolutely petrified. His cellmates bumped the bids up to 600 and 700 buwons, all for the very last photo he had of his sweetheart. A filthy question from a heavy-set inmate about taking her on a date sparked another wave of nasty laughs. Sanjo looked at the photo and cracked a sick joke about how much fun he would have had with her if she were still alive. His lackeys played right along, joking about his twisted tastes and the risk of getting locked up for it. Yuban's stare was totally blank, glued to the floor, but an absolute hellfire of rage was building up inside him. A weird late-night chat flashed through his mind, right while that boss kept going with his filthy, disgusting jokes. Don't blink, because a massive strike suddenly silenced all the trash talk. One devastating punch had the arrogant Sanjo crying out in agony. Yuban just couldn't hold his fury back anymore and unleashed all that bottled-up rage straight onto the blonde bloke. The rest of the inmates were left completely shocked, jaws on the floor. They couldn't believe the brutal transformation of the quiet prisoner. Every single bloody punch was pure vengeance, for the filthy words about Dee, and for every bit of humiliation he'd been put through. Yuban's face was completely unrecognizable. There was no backing down anymore, just pure, absolutely focused hatred. The quiet bloke, Jion, watching this sudden outburst, was totally gobsmacked. He couldn't believe this absolute beastly shift in his cellmate. Right then, he remembered a chat they had down in the workshops. Yuban had opened up about his life, even though Jion hadn't even said a word back. Our main bloke talked about his old man, the right-hand man to a terrifying crime boss. Getting brutally bashed at home was just an everyday occurrence. He confessed that he only put up with it for one reason. At the end of the day, it was his own dad. But one day he crossed the line the day he messed with Dee. Meanwhile, Sanjo, copping an absolute hiding, could only mutter a curse, totally unable to defend himself. The leader's desperate scream echoed through the cell, begging the others to step in. Jion remembered Yuban's exact words. The bashings from his dad taught him how to take the pain. Years of abuse turned him into a wicked fighter, capable of absolutely wrecking multiple opponents. Can you believe it? This coward was now desperately offering cash to try and stop the brutal rain of punches. A sinister smirk twisted Yuban's face when he heard about the money, something he once would have put up with absolutely anything for. Another devastating blow came with some ice-cold words. She's gone. The reason I held back is gone. In that split second, bitter memories of his old man savagely bashing him flooded his mind, demanding he follow the mobster path. The memories took him straight back to his childhood, when as a little kid, he struggled to get back on his feet after another brutal beating from his dad. His cruelty had absolutely no limits. Even seeing him try to stand up, he'd just hit him again, knocking him down over and over. He was so terrified that even as a teenager, he didn't dare look him in the eye. He figured out that getting stronger was literally the only bloody way out to save himself. The breaking point was when he finally dared to stare right back at him, earning his total approval for the very first time. Snapping back to the present. When the cops stormed into the cell, they were stopped dead in their tracks by the extreme violence. The guard's shock quickly turned into pure horror as he realized the sheer scale of the bloody massacre. Mangled bodies were scattered all over the cell, and right in the middle of it all stood Yuban, making for a genuinely terrifying scene. The officer's disbelief turned into sheer dread when the kid, with a creepy sort of calmness, confirmed that he was the only one responsible for the bloodbath. Sitting there, completely alone, Yuban couldn't take his eyes off that photo holding his happy days with Dee. Heartbreak and utter despair flooded his eyes. He just couldn't accept the tragic death of the only person he ever loved. And trust me, mates, you're going to want to see what happens when the memories of that scream from school absolutely change everything. Stick with me here, because this story actually hurts. Yuan just stared at her, completely stunned, while she went off her head about his cruel old man bashing him right before high school started. Every single word Day spat out was dripping with absolute rage over that downright unacceptable abuse. Right there, smack bang in the middle of the schoolyard, she demanded he stand up for himself against that abusive prick of a dad. But Yuban, trying to brush off yet another bashing, saying he was already used to it, only made to blow up even more. Her threat to go and confront his dad herself brought up an old promise. Yuban getting dead serious all of a sudden made it crystal clear just how important that pact was. No matter what happened, she had to stay completely away from his place, hiding his genuine terror for her safety. He joked around, saying if she put herself in danger, he'd make her call him Oppa forever. Pulling a face, Day reminded him that he was the only bloke capable of dragging a poor, daydreaming orphan like her back to reality. Her eyes drifted up to the sky as she pictured her future life in Seoul after graduating. The absolute disgust of living in a suffocating orphanage and such a depressing suburb echoed in every single word she said. Her massive plans included a top-tier uni, a killer career, flashy cars, and a fancy apartment. The heavy thought of ending up all alone, after his only loved one took off, absolutely crushed Yuban's heart. Well, that was until an excited Day suggested that, obviously, they should just move in together. Right then and there, they decided to seal the deal by linking their pinky fingers, turning it into the symbol of their promise to each other, sealed with some real, genuine affection. Just at that moment, a photographer who spotted them in the courtyard offered to take their picture, a crackin' idea that Day happily agreed to. You and I have got to see this. That happy moment was frozen in time by the photographer, and it's the exact same photo our main bloke holds onto today. The agony in Yuban's chest was just beyond words, exploding into a brutal punch straight into the wall that left deep cracks in the solid concrete. The guilt was eating him alive. Because if he hadn't been locked up, Day would never have had to visit him in that absolute hellhole. Every new strike against the wall was him trying to let out the fury and pure desperation roaring inside him. That guilt over the death of his one and only love was completely tearing the young prisoner's soul to shreds. The unwanted tears, held back for so bloody long, finally started pouring out. The guard's voice calling out for inmate 7199 cut right through his moment of deep mourning. The copper's encouraging words actually seemed to show some genuine care for what happened to the kid. The guard, just unable to ignore the state the bloke was in, tried to talk him into eating for the first time in ages. On his way out, the guard dropped a harsh truth. Life goes on. Mate, no matter what. Yubuan dropped to his knees, bawling his eyes out, and in sheer agony, he begged Day for forgiveness over and over again. During lunch in the lockup, the quiet new bloke, 3397, was just focused on shoveling down his rice. A nosy cellmate tried to strike up a yarn, asking if he was up to speed on the latest rumors going round. I know exactly what you guys are thinking. The story of how Yubuan absolutely slaughtered his whole cell and ended up in solitary was already doing the rounds all over the prison. The inmates were talking about the girl's tragic end and the downright abuse of power that destroyed this young bloke. Listening in dead silence, Dot remembered the horrific stuff he'd witnessed in that doomed cell. All of a sudden, an aggressive inmate crashed the chat, violently shoving the gossip's head straight down into his plate of tucker. His mocking question about their little gossip session sounded like a dead-set death threat in the suddenly quiet mess hall. The reputation of this bloke named John, locked up for a wildly violent armed robbery, made absolutely everyone shut their traps. John had a massive rep for being one of the most dangerous inmates in the whole joint. He kept laying into the other bloke, acting all curious about the details of the power shift over in that other cell. His hint about a potential plot against his rule sounded like a straight-up threat. The guys around him wasted zero time denying any bloody intention of trying to take him down. This top dog's mocking question about how the humiliated kid was doing only served to flex his absolute dominance. The poor bastard getting picked on apologized real quick, scrambling to backpedal on his careless words about the incidents in that other cell. Shoving his hands in his pockets with total arrogance, John demanded to know the name of the inmate who orchestrated that whole hit. And that's where we'll leave it for now. The quiet new bloke listened closely as they dropped Yubuan's name, the guy absolutely responsible for the riots. 1 week later, the guard reported that the old cell boss, who got absolutely wrecked by Yuan, was still recovering in the sickbay. Strap in for this absolute madness, mate. They let our main character out of solitary confinement with a strict warning to keep his head down and stay out of trouble when he went back to the other inmates. The screech of the metal door caught Gorm's attention, and he looked up straight away. Yuan's return took absolutely everyone by surprise. With his head hanging low and a completely dead-eyed stare, it was crystal clear the poor bloke was dealing with some heavy psychological trauma. Guam watched him thoughtfully, still trying to wrap his head around the bloody unbelievable fact that this kid had actually dethroned the leader. Though you could just feel the tension in the air, there was no way the rest of the inmates were going to let a stunt like that slide without payback. All of a sudden, his old enemies started acting buddy-buddy, patting him on the shoulder with this totally fake concern, acting like there hadn't been any bad blood between them at all. They offered him water, shoulder rubs, and told him to take it easy after surviving the absolute hell of the punishment cell. Gorm watched this whole circus of fake sympathy play out while he wrote, coming to a dead-set realization. Because in a hellhole like this, brute force is absolutely everything. Out in the yard, the usual dead silence was shattered when Yuan suddenly spoke up to the silent killer. The question about his real motives caught the assassin completely off guard. Pay close attention here. Mate, Yuan wanted to know why a bloke who had wiped out 7 people would bother stopping him before he crossed a line he could never uncross. The blunt question snapped Gorm right out of his own little world, dragging a really dark memory straight to the surface. He was standing in his classroom, having just slaughtered 7 of his classmates with his bare hands. But just as Guam was trying to put a sentence together, they were rudely interrupted. It was Park John, acting all shocked at how scrawny the kid who bashed Sanjo actually was. Giving him a filthy look and grinning like an absolute psycho, John sized up his competition. He asked him straight out if his little rebellion was just a stunt to steal the top dog's spot. Yuan's response was completely deadpan, just telling the bloke to piss off and leave him alone. It showed he couldn't care less about their bloody pecking order, making John's eyes go wide at the sheer cheek of it. The veins in John's neck bulged with absolute rage at the disrespect, and he delivered a gut-wrenching blow straight to Yuan's stomach. John absolutely despised anyone who forgot their place, swearing he was gonna teach him the brutal lesson the hospitalized boss had failed to deliver. With a savage jerk, he grabbed Yuan by the hair and yanked his face straight into a flying fist, calling him a filthy dog that dared to bite the hand that feeds it. But out of nowhere, a guard caught the punch midair, keeping that twisted smirk on his face. John let go of Yuan, acting like they were just having a bit of a laugh. The guard then just turned a blind eye, pretending he hadn't seen a bloody thing. As he walked off, John made sure to remind Yuan about the unspoken rules of the slammer. Unbelievable. Right, the top dogs get a free pass to start brawls, just by using the excuse that they're keeping everyone in line. With a massive hit, John sent Yuan flying straight into the metal fencing of the yard. He whinged about how the kid wasn't even putting up a fight, comparing him to a beaten stray and saying it sucked all the fun right out of bashing him. Yuan, who was well used to copping a hiding, just gave him a deadpan stare until something stopped him dead in his tracks, a green dragon tattooed right on the bloke's arm. Seeing that green dragon instantly dragged him back to the past, straight into the nightmare memories of his abusive old man. The image of his dad hoisting him up by the throat while he was gasping for air in pure terror, with that exact same dragon tattooed on his chest, flashed right before his eyes with terrifying clarity. That bloody dragon was just looming over him, tearing open the scars of a childhood that was nothing but pure, unadulterated fear. John kept pushing his buttons, noticing that the kid's defiant vibe had completely dropped the scared act. That's when the bastard deliberately brought up the dead girl, just desperate to get a sick reaction out of him. And that smug little question about how the accident messed with his head, that was the final straw. Hearing her name come out of his filthy mouth was too much. Yuan unleashed an absolutely devastating kick straight to his face. The blindside attack sent John crashing to the dirt, leaving a nasty mark. Pure outrage twisted the leader's face. He never in a million years expected the kid to hit back like that. After biting his tongue and taking the hits for so long, Yuan completely lost it, with a rage you'd never expect from the quiet guy. He launched himself forward, brutally twisting John's arm right against the concrete. "You bloody mutt." John spat, absolutely stunned, but the words Yuan whispered next, dripping with a slow, venomous hatred, made the top dog choke on his own spit in sheer terror. "Stick around, mates, because this terrified bloke can't even begin to process how a nobody inmate just had the guts to put him in his place. Stick around for this absolute madness," mates down on the ground. He was spitting out desperate threats of revenge. But Yubuan just kept crushing that hand with the green dragon tattoo, like it stood for every bit of suffering he'd ever been through. His grip was dead set ruthless. John's muscles cramped up in pure agony, and all that bloody arrogance just vanished into pathetic begging for mercy. It didn't take long for the arm to give out under the pressure, completely snapping under our main character's brutal strength. And in the very next second, A savage scream of absolute agony echoed right through the whole correctional center. Jium, the silent assassin, watched the whole thing go down with a rare look of pure shock on his face. Yuban flashed back to when he was just a kid, remembering how staring down that hated tattoo was his only way to deal with all that bottled up rage. That green dragon stood for every single humiliation and cruel bit of abuse he'd ever copped. He remembered the neighbors whispering about him out on the street, calling him the gangster's son or the black sheep, while he just kept his chin up and walked tall, even covered in bruises. Then an even sharper memory hit him like a ton of bricks that day he came home and heard those heart-wrenching screams. The room was an absolute mess, and right there was his old man, looking like a straight-up nightmare, standing over Day, who was collapsed on the floor. She actually stood up to that cowardly bully, screaming at him to just leave her boy alone. But his dad completely lost the plot at the back chat. With a voice dripping with hate, he spat out that she brought this lesson on herself. Yuan felt a massive shudder run right through his whole body. His knuckles turned white with pure, blinding rage and utter disbelief that his old man would actually hurt Day like that. Get a load of this. Guys, when that monster lunged right at her, mocking her for being an orphan and threatening to send her back. Every single mental barrier Yuan had just completely snapped. He grabbed a vice and delivered the first blow, following it up with a wild, furious flurry of punches, letting out years of bottled-up pain and absolute helplessness. The aftermath was irreversible. The father who used to strike pure terror into him was left completely bedridden, locked in a vegetative state. The doctor, looking genuinely gutted for him, handed over the diagnosis. Next to zero chance he'd ever wake up and be normal again. Yuan spent hours just staring at the motionless body of the monster who made his childhood an absolute living hell, finally realizing that his own life had changed forever. I'm just going to take a quick breather here, mates, to invite you all to hit that subscribe button for the channel. Drop a like on the video, leave a comment, and share it around so more legends can get in on this story. And hey, if you want to support the content, feel free to drop a super thanks or become a channel member. Righto, with that out of the way, let's get straight back into the action of this epic story. Snapping back to the present, the prison yard was absolutely packed with inmates itching to watch the brawl. Rumors about the crazy bloke who'd just gotten out of solitary, only to stir up even more trouble, were spreading like an absolute bushfire right across the whole joint. Yan stood there like a statue, his eyes deadlocked onto the green dragon on his enemy's arm, that symbol he utterly despised with every fiber of his being. The guards were screaming at everyone to get back, but the prisoners completely ignored them, totally glued to the scene. Meanwhile, up in one of the offices, a high-ranking officer was calmly having a drink, celebrating the recovery of his guest. The prison director, Changok, surrounded by all his lackeys, promised he was ready to help out with absolutely anything, and then asked for the name of the inmate his guest had actually come to see. Back down in the cell block, you could have heard a pin drop. It was dead silent. Can you even imagine the absolute terror? The other inmates were still trying to process his blind fury, terrified out of their wits about sharing a cell with him. Gorm just kept scribbling down notes, deeply shaken up by everything that just gone down. Out of nowhere, the cold bark of a guard shattered the tense silence. Prisoner 7199. You've got a visitor. Yuan immediately flinched. Who the hell could that be? His mum had passed away ages ago, and he didn't have any other family. With his heart pounding out of his chest, he walked down the corridor, desperate for some answers. But the guards didn't take him to the standard visiting room. Instead, they marched him right up to the director's massive office. Yuban looked absolutely baffled as he stepped through the doorway into the office of the bloke running the whole prison. And right there, sitting on the fancy leather sofa, was his father Kanong. Leaning on his crutches, he greeted his son, spinning some absolute garbage about how much he'd missed him all this time. The kid's initial shock was instantly wiped out by a wave of sickening disgust. Brace yourselves for this. Guys, sitting right in front of him was the exact bloke who'd turned his entire life into a living nightmare. The image of that brutal bashing flashed through his mind again, making him clench his fists in pure, helpless rage. Faking this phony sense of concern, his dad brought up the brawl in the yard, just brushing it off like it was some silly kid's game. Yuan wasn't even listening to a word of it. His eyes were totally glazed over, completely frozen on the memory of that half-dead body lying in the hospital bed. Stick around to watch this. Panic completely paralyzed him as he stepped closer to the couch, only to confirm that the monster, so cynically calling him son, was actually him. Director Chang-ok threw a condescending hand on his shoulder, smirking as he watched the poor bloke looking so utterly confused. He let him know, with a completely mocking tone, about his old man's miraculous wake-up from the coma. For our main character, this bloody news felt like a sickening insult to every shred of hope he had left. His veins popped from the sheer strain of trying to wrap his head around how the hell reality was contradicting the doctor's exact diagnosis of brain death or total disability. "What, don't you trust your old man?" the bloke asked, kicking off a sadistic little game designed to break whatever tiny bit of fight the kid had left in him. Kang Yong spoke about his boy with twisted pride, claiming he was the only person in the entire world capable of putting him in the emergency room. Those fake tears and that flushed red face just made Yuan sick to his stomach, exposing his absolute hypocrisy. The complicit director handed over a tissue so that Monster could wipe away his crocodile tears. Then that so-called confession of fatherly love hit like a bolt of lightning, revealing his true, dark intentions. Listen closely to this, flexing his immense power. The father spat out the exact words that completely shattered Yuan. He confessed to the murder. With an inhuman calmness, he recounted how he watched the girl lying there at the pedestrian crossing, detailing her final pleas for help while he just stood there and didn't lift a bloody finger. "She told me I was a disgraceful father," Kang Yong sneered. "So I just turned my back and left her to bleed out all by herself." The cynical bastard admitted that he used to think his own son was a total bloody loser. But seeing him fight back that day, he actually felt a tiny spark of respect. He explained his decision to take the girl out as if he were just talking about a standard business strategy. He justified the atrocious crime as an act of tough love, just so Yuan could finally awaken his true potential. Hearing that completely devastated the kid, who didn't hesitate for a single second before launching a furious attack straight at his father. The terrified director barked at the guards to restrain him, and instantly, a sharp burning pain shot right through the boy's back from the tasers. The brutal shocks made his eyes glow with an unnatural light as his body convulsed on the floor, completely paralyzed by the high voltage. Through the immense pain, his old man's voice kept drilling into his ears, mocking his attempt at revenge. Kang Yong laid down a challenge. Right inside that very prison, members of his mob were already putting down roots, young blokes branded with fresh tattoos, ready to join his pack of predators, become the top dog of this joint. "Prove that you're better than these little pups," he ordered with a seriously cheeky smirk. "That's the only bloody way you'll ever get to face me man to man and take my spot." With a superhuman effort, our main character somehow managed to drag himself to his feet, ripping the taser wires right off him, leaving the director absolutely speechless in shock. Did you reckon he was about to give him what for? Yeah, me too. His battered body lunged towards his father, but a tall bloke in a crisp suit and a scarlet tie stepped right in the way. With a single, brutal punch, the stranger sent Yuan crashing right back down to the floor. He was Kang Yong's personal bodyguard, whose one sacred job was keeping the boss safe. The kid tried to push himself up again, totally stunning the guard with his unbelievable sheer willpower. Leaning on his crutches, his dad watched the whole thing with fake sympathy, He reminded him that his impulsive little outbursts were completely useless for now, and brought up his final ultimatum once again. The only way you'll ever lay a finger on me is when you seize absolute power inside this hellhole of a prison. The boss's men tossed the boy back to the ground and walked right out of the office, leaving our protagonist trembling and gasping for breath in dead silence. A few days later, down in the woodwork shop, the vibe was exactly the same as always. The quiet Giwon focused purely on carving incredibly detailed patterns into a bar of soap. His immense skill was so good that the guard on duty let him finish up early. Rumors were floating around among the inmates about his mastery with tools, but they couldn't see the brutal killer hiding behind that fragile look. Suddenly, a new character entered the scene, a tattooed bloke with piercings named Ganmin. Doing time for robbery and arson, he walked up to Giwon looking curious, trying to bring up their old high school days. Ganmin, with an arrogant smirk, couldn't hide his morbid fascination with the gory details of the 7-person massacre. "Is it true what the news was saying?" he asked in total disbelief. "I find it bloody hard to believe that the model student actually turned into this." Tension gripped Giwon's body as the question about the news hung heavy in the air. His old classmate's shocked tone gave away his absolute disbelief at seeing a straighter student transform into a cold-blooded killer. That mocking reminder sounded like a thinly veiled challenge to the new arrival. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around to see what happens next. Luckily enough, the guard stepping in right on time put an end to the awkward chat, sending every prisoner straight back to their spot. Get a load of this bloke saying goodbye with that completely fake mateness. Yom clenched his fists so hard in absolute rage that his nails drew blood, showing the massive mental storm that run-in had sparked in him. Later on, night fell over the prison, leaving the inmates locked up in their cells until dawn.
Jan,
Head bowed and staring blankly at the floor, was sinking deep into his darkest thoughts. His old man's words about ruling the prison to get his revenge just kept echoing on repeat in his mind. That's when a fierce purple glow sparked in his eyes, plotting his first big move to take absolute control of the joint. Inside the cell, the inmates couldn't stop whinging about the boring daily menu of nothing but veggies. Brace yourselves, because just when the misery of being locked up was feeling the heaviest, Yuban stood up and did something that left them absolutely stunned. He casually strolled up to a guard and, giving the middle finger to the whole prison system, asked him for a pizza. To everyone's absolute shock, the officer actually agreed, and soon the bloody beautiful smell of melted cheese flooded the cell. The cheers and thanks from his cellmates were barely step one of his plan, since he realized that if the guards took orders from his old man, his power in there was bloody limitless, while the rest of them scoffed down the food and wondered who this bloke actually was. Yuan just kept quiet, a pretty bitter smirk painted across his face, but then all eyes shifted to Guam, who didn't want a bar of it, drowning in deep sorrow. Back in the woodwork shop, Yuban and Gion were working together when suddenly the main character's sharp eyes caught something dodgy. Danmin walked over faking a sore arm, and out of nowhere, a shower of sharp nails flew right at Guam. The new kid just stood there frozen, letting the spikes pierce his body like he didn't feel a thing. Ganmin's fake apology, claiming it slipped because of the oil, was the absolute last straw. Pure rage flooded Guam's mind, his eyes burning red as he whispered his tormentor's name. I know what you lot are thinking, but right before he could blow his lid, a 2-meter giant rocked up surrounded by thugs. Ganmin, sweating under his boss's glare, spilled his lies about Gom's past. Though he quickly threatened him, he grabbed Gom's head real hard, and the glint of a nail woke up a horrific trauma from his past. A nasty flashback from high school hit him. He was locked inside a cupboard, bawling and begging for mercy, while Ganmin and the rest of them nailed the door shut just to torture him. A kid's face just millimeters away from those sharp points gave those monsters the most sadistic thrill. And right now, Ganmin was trying to repeat that exact same torment, shoving Geomus in front of the thugs, who were taking the piss out of his cowardice. But all of a sudden, the laughs stopped dead. A terrifying shift flared up in the victim's eyes, and the blonde bloke watched, completely gobsmacked, as the rookie transformed to face him down. With ice-cold rage, Gion made the twisted offer to teach him a real assassination technique right then and there. That bully couldn't wrap his head around how his prey had turned into a lethal predator with a bloody, creepy smile. But right at that second, the officer called the end of the break, forcing Yuban and his crew to pull back. That very same night in the cell, after some absolutely ridiculous religious debate among the inmates, Yuban broke the ice to thank Yon to his face. He honestly confessed that him stepping in the day Park John attacked had saved him from a murder charge. Jian asked why he was so keen to get out, and Yuan spilled the painful truth. His old man was a mobster, and he needed his freedom to get revenge. Later on, a golden key appeared right in front of Guom's face, putting him on high alert for a brand new twist of fate. The bloke working at the prison, after hastily apologizing for some urgent family business, handed the key to the quiet young bloke so he could clean the entire workshop. Absolute mess of tools all over the place needed a proper deep clean, making it his last job for the day. Suddenly, something weird caught his eye, leaving him frozen stiff. A massive moth with its wings spread out was just chilling on his table. Believe me, that sight dragged up the darkest traumas from his past. Come with me and let's see how an innocent memory of Gan Ming ended up linked to a defenseless insect, hiding a terrifying secret. Seeing that butterfly pinned to the wall in such a gruesome way made him absolutely shudder. In that very moment, he realized that Gan Ming's eagerness to show off his bugs was the first red flag of his twisted nature. Back then, his disgust for creepy crawlies didn't stop his mate from showing off that spine-chilling butterfly collection. A massive horde that gave him a weird mix of sheer amazement and absolute revulsion. That strange friendship with Gan Ming was clouded by the mocking stares of their classmates over such a bizarre hobby. That collective rejection threw this heavy aura of isolation over Gan Ming, something completely invisible to his naive mate. What if we make you swallow those butterflies you catch, eh? While his classmates humiliated him, Gan Ming just copped it in silence. Jion watched on, feeling an overwhelming rage at the sick abuse. That was when he, stepping up as the class president, put a stop to the bullying by reminding the thugs that break time was over. Faced with the rep's authority, the bullies chickened out and backed off, leaving Gan Ming alone with his unexpected savior. That genuine worry when he asked if he was all right was the first real spark of a true friendship between the two. Gan Ming tried to play it cool by inviting him to play some video games, but some other blokes suddenly rocked up to organize a game of footy and totally ruined the moment. Pay close attention here, guys, because this tiny rejection would change both their destinies forever, without them even knowing it. When the new school year kicked off, they ended up in completely different classrooms. And seeing Gan Ming's empty desk really got Jion worried. The rumors about the bullying were still going around his new class. Brutal details of vicious bashings reached Jion's ears, finding out they had dragged him off to the storeroom. Jion bolted down the hallways in pure desperation, his heart pounding out of his chest with this terrifying fear. When he finally got there, he saw a bunch of older students threateningly crowding around something, and the cruel taunts aimed at this supposed loser just sent his anxiety through the roof. Suddenly, Gan Ming popped up from behind, grabbing his head. The nightmare was just about to begin. With a blindsided shove, Gan Ming chucked Jion right into the dreaded darkness of that office where the seniors were waiting, his brain barely able to process the horrific betrayal of his childhood mate. Just shut your trap. That was Gan Ming's only order, flashing a complicit smirk, as the metal latch locked shut like a death sentence. I know exactly what you're thinking. This humiliation had already crossed the line, straight into a sadistic game. That sinister offer to join the bullies in catching bugs sounded absolutely terrifying in the gloom of that locked room. Jion screamed out for help, but his ex-mate just stood there smiling, clutching a hammer, with a look of pure, unhinged madness. Cutting back to the present, Jian thought about how everyone loves butterflies, but they completely despise and aggressively swat away moths in absolute disgust. Right then, Gan Ming showing up in the workshop with a live moth made him shake to his core, as he crushed its wings right down to dust. Then, with a sadistic glare, he locked eyes with him, blaming him as the sole reason for all his misery. He told him that because he walked away, he turned into that scummy little moth. While he got to be the butterfly that everyone loved, you've turned into a bloody monster. Jian fired back, but Gan Ming just gave a twisted smile, confessing that murdering 7 people was the final step in his descent into madness. He hinted that it was all just karma for abandoning him, cracking a sneer that promised an absolutely brutal revenge. Pure rage made Jion's whole body tremble, his fingernails digging so hard into his palms that they drew blood. Gan Ming, hiding his own weakness behind this sadistic cruelty, declared he couldn't care less about his ex-mate's ruined life. Suddenly, Gan Ming's crew grabbed Jion, slapping a hand over his mouth while the blonde bloke just smirked, promising to torture him in the exact same way he used to dissect those bugs back in the day. That drag over to the metal locker felt like a one-way ticket straight to hell. Absolute horror twisted Jion's face when he saw the locker, but his desperate begging just smashed right into Gan Ming's wall of pure hatred. Finally, accusing Jian of being the only one to blame for everything that was going down, the poor bloke's defenseless body was mercilessly chucked right into the cramped metal locker. And that's where we leave off, trapped right alongside him in this cruel symphony, with a horrific ending we'll be uncovering very soon. Brace yourselves, because we're kicking off this ride with the female prisoner's furious voice echoing off the dark metal walls. Ganmin's cynical comeback, promising her a bloody special little gift he'd left behind, sounded absolutely chilling in the gloom of the workshop where this whole nightmare kicked off. The captive was absolutely disgusted when a whole swarm of creepy crawlies started dropping straight into her locker. A twisted smirk flashed across Gan Min's face as he mockingly asked exactly what she thought of his little present. But the bastard's smug look quickly faded when he realized he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted so badly. Not a single tear, no begging for mercy. The victim's deadly quiet patience started to genuinely piss him off. And the sick comments hyping up Gion's massive endurance just made the whole vibe even more terrifying. When someone asked if he felt sorry for his old assassin mate, his reaction caught everyone right off guard. A twisted glint flashed in his eyes as he brushed the whole idea off with a totally disgusted sneer. Gan Min squared up, making it crystal clear that this was just the beginning of her absolute hell. The twisted hype of waiting to hear her scream in pure agony completely warped his face into something gruesome. But Yubuan rocked up out of nowhere, completely crashing their sick little freak show. Asking what they were going to do first riled up the goons, instantly sparking a pretty aggressive reaction. But get a load of this, because one bloke fully launched himself at him, trying to punch on and prove who the boss was. The rest of the crims reacted in a flash, piling onto the intruder with wild swings and a load of swearing. But the absolute hell Yuan went through alongside his old man turned his body into a lethal weapon, fully capable of taking down multiple blokes at once. With dead steady moves and crazy precise strikes, he completely dodged the inmate's clumsy attacks like it was nothing. Pure panic twisted the blonde bloke's face when he saw his grand revenge plan completely falling to pieces. Locked right inside that metal locker, acting as a makeshift cell, John shivered when she heard a familiar voice slipping through the crack in the door. I know what you're thinking, but just before this, everything back in the cell block was dead quiet. The inmates were whispering about why that quiet new bloke had gone completely missing. Right then, our main guy's sharp ears picked up some chatter about a so-called cleanup, and his gut instantly told him something was massively screwed up. The young bloke shot straight up, drawing surprised looks from his cellmates, who were totally used to seeing him chill, as he called out to the guard walking by. He used a tone so firm and bossy it absolutely shattered the daily routine. Underneath the officer's cap was a completely exhausted face, totally resigned to dealing with another weird request from this bizarre prisoner. The other inmates were expecting Yuban to pull off another crazy culinary miracle, figuring he'd just order up another pizza completely loaded with new toppings. But his demand to crack the cell open hit them like a ton of bricks, leaving everyone absolutely gobsmacked. Even the officer froze up completely, barely able to wrap his head around the sheer bloody nerve of the bloke, thanks to having the right mates in high places. Yuban easily rocked up to the woodwork shop to put an end to Ganmin's bullying. The goons' bodies were already fully knocked out cold on the floor, leaving the blonde bloke standing next to a massive 2-meter giant, who muttered the newcomer's name in pure shock. The ripped giant's deep voice gave away a bit of genuine respect when he pegged Yubuan as the bloke behind all the recent prison riots. Gan's eyes lit up with this sick, twisted interest when he realized just how famous his rival really was. Right then, the massive bloke hinting at exactly why Yuban was stepping in put the dead silent Guam on high alert. The thought that Guo and Yubuan were such tight mates actually made the captive feel pretty uneasy, watching closely through the tiny gap in the locker. Gan Min's nasty jab about their loyal friendship sounded incredibly bitter in the intensely heavy air of the room. The massive, bold bloke's loud laugh was just a cover-up for his obvious jealousy over such a rock-solid brotherhood, though that so-called admiration quickly morphed into pure, blinding rage. The giant offered a completely fake truce, swinging his massive fist straight through the air at him. But right before the punch could even connect, Yuban countered, dropping him straight to the workshop floor with a sickening thud, staring down at him with absolute disgust. He threw that mocking question right back in his face. What a bloody epic ending, mates. Flat out rejecting any future ties between the two of them. Brace yourselves, because after the dead silence, Yubuan glares right at Gunmin, demanding to know why he was so damn obsessed with destroying Guion. Hearing that the punishment was overkill, the blonde snapped violently, his scream echoing like pure bloody madness. Bitter accusations about past betrayals spewed from his mouth, loaded with painful memories of fake mates and absolute coldness. He compared everyone to bloody snakes, calling friendship a curse that was always doomed to end in brutal backstabbing. Suddenly, that giant's massive arms came out of nowhere, wrapping round Yuan's neck like a deadly whip. The bloke who'd just been beaten down was now pinning him with an unbreakable, iron grip, cockily bragging that their last fight was just a basic warm-up. A sick sadistic smirk spread across Ganmin's face. He taunted him again, asking just how much friendship was really worth, squeezing Yubuan's neck even tighter, quickly sussing out the situation. And this is where things get really bloody messy. The kid was running out of air, and he was starting to black out completely. Right then, Yum sneaks up from behind with chains and chokes the giant out, demanding he let Yubuan go. His sudden appearance caught everyone completely off guard. The blonde's stunned gaze snapped from the empty locker straight to the now freed prisoner, absolutely clueless as to how he'd managed to break out. It all went down during the first scuffle, when one of the goons smashed into the locker and accidentally busted the lock. While Ganmin was still trying to process what had happened, a brutal kick from Yuan sent him crashing straight to the floor, taking him out in a flash. A quick comment about how close they came to a total disaster made it crystal clear just how sketchy the situation was for both prisoners. The chains in Guam's hands turned into an improvised whip, wrapping furiously right round the neck of that 2-meter giant. The bloke's scream of agony echoed right through the workshop as the chains tightened without mercy, totally ignoring his useless struggles. Can you bloody believe it? Watching this, Ganmin's face twists with sick pleasure, and he demands they choke him even harder, getting a real kick out of the poor bloke's suffering. The giant's eyes started rolling into the back of his head, spit drooling from his mouth. Classic signs he was choking out, finally with absolute disgust. Jayan let go of the chains, and the massive unit collapsed heavily onto the floor. The kid's ragged breathing showed the massive physical and emotional toll that absolute nightmare had just taken on him. Guam's face twisted with pure, raw anger as he stared down the bloke who'd tormented him for so damn long. Ganmin scrambled backward in terror, his leg shaking like a leaf, desperately begging him to just bloody stop. He tried to make these pathetic excuses for himself, trying to act like it was all just the fault of the crap cards he'd been dealt in life. Rubbing his neck nervously, he muttered that acting like a psycho was his only way of protecting himself from everyone else, though those words sounded absolutely ridiculous coming from a bloke who was getting off on torturing people just a few minutes ago. Jian walked forward slowly, and Ganmin backed away in absolute dread, scrambling across the dirt to escape a beating he knew he bloody well deserved. His hysterical bowing and begging for forgiveness showed that his tough guy act had completely crumbled. Blubbering through absolute rubbish apologies, he was trying to fix things any way he could. His pathetic screaming, calling himself a useless piece of trash, felt like a desperate, last-ditch attempt to dodge payback after years of cruel bullying. But Gion's response took him completely off guard, telling him straight up that he never actually saw him as a weirdo or a loser. Those words left the blonde completely gutted and confused. Pure confusion washed over his face, totally unable to process what he was hearing, right before Guam hit him with the most brutal truth. His entire life had been wrecked by his own selfish paranoia, and those words sealed the ultimate fate of their long-lost friendship. In the end, he admitted that despite all the bad blood between them, he never actually wanted him dead, so he turned and walked right past him to leave the workshop, without saying another word, telling him he'd always considered him a mate felt like the final goodbye for a shattered relationship that couldn't be saved anymore. But trust me, Ganmin managed to screw up even that final gesture. Join me as we see how his toxic comeback, mocking his old mate, finally pushed everyone over the edge. Right then, Yuan spun around like lightning and planted a brutal kick straight to the face of that absolute psycho traitor. The dead calm tone in his voice made it bloody clear that their long history of fighting had finally come to a permanent end. Just before taking off, a faint smile cracked across the quiet Guam's face as he muttered a simple thanks to Yubuan. Our main bloke was so completely caught off guard that he could barely even process such an unexpected show of humility. But the peace didn't last long. A massive bloke suddenly barged right into the workshop, stepping up to the blonde kid and demanding to know why he'd ditched their cell without his say-so. His hysterical screaming about cockroaches in his cell and his absolute obsession with catching them echoed loud and clear all through the workshop. Yuan and Guam just stared at each other, totally gobsmacked to see a giant like him shaking with pure terror over a few tiny bugs. The second the big bloke noticed the blood splatters on his face, he had another total meltdown, frantically trying to wipe it off while screaming about how much he absolutely hated dirt and germs. Out of nowhere, the massive hands of Prisoner 2000, 163 grabbed Yubuan's clothes to wipe his own face clean. His completely unhinged stare and the creepy way he asked if his face was clean ramped the tension up to 11 in a split second. The guy brought his face dangerously close to Yubuan's, violently demanding a straight answer right then and there. The vibe in the workshop got dead heavy, with everyone just frozen stiff watching this absolute freak show. Then Yubuan looked him dead in the eye and flat out told him no. His face was still filthy. The big guy just completely froze, staring back with a look of pure shock. John, on the other hand, tensed up straight away, knowing full well his mate's honesty was about to kick off a bloody disaster. Suddenly the giant let out an absolute feral scream, rearing his arm back, ready to drop a devastating punch. Lucky for them, the guard rocked up just in time, barking orders for everyone to get back to their cells, shutting down what would have been a massive brawl. As they backed away, the giant obsessively muttered the numbers 7199. Yubuan's code his eyes,
Wide open with this feral.
Animalistic rage, and the weird way he kept sniffing the air for his prey would give anyone the creeps. The next morning, yard time finally rolled around, and all the inmates headed out into the fresh air to just chill out and take a breather. Now pay attention here, because Yubuan calmly asking why everyone was following him really caught the others off guard. Just a bloke sitting on the stairs surrounded by a bunch of random fanboys. One of the inmates gave a cheeky smirk and tried to answer him, but not before introducing himself as Gunnaman, prisoner 8671, from cell C36. Rumours had been spreading all over the yard about some new bloke who'd kicked off a massive fight, and every single time the story got passed around, it just got blown more and more out of proportion. Gunnaman straight up admitted he just wanted to use Yubuan's badass reputation as a sort of meat shield. Our main bloke replied with a cold, deadpan fine by me. The guy could do whatever the hell he wanted, just as long as he didn't get in his way. To be honest, our boy's mind was completely wrapped up in something way more important. He just couldn't stop thinking about that tattoo of a dragon surrounded by red flowers, the notorious mark of the red flower dragon. Hunting down the bastards with that ink was his absolute top priority, also he could finally get revenge for his old man. The thought that some of those MAFIA scumbags were operating right here on the inside just kept running through his head. Then, noticing where he was looking and sussing out what he was up to, the guy dropped a surprisingly sharp comment. When Yuan actually hinted that his suspicions were spot on, the new bloke got absolutely pumped, flashing a cocky smile. He offered to help him track him down, bragging about having way more contacts on the inside than our main bloke did. Yuan then described the exact design of the tattoo he was hunting for. A green dragon wrapped in red flowers, the dead giveaway mark of the Red Flower Dragon gang. Hearing that detail made it finally click for Gunnaman, pulling a disgusted face. He told him he actually knew someone, some absolute dropkick who, trust me, has that exact same ink plastered on his skin.